I'll create a separate document with an expanded part 1 of the story in about 1,200 words. I'll keep the language simple and natural, make it human-centric, ensure it's engaging, and avoid any content that might violate YouTube policies. Made the F-22 pilot stand at attention. Part 1. The morning started like any other for Jessica Chen. Her alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., and she dragged herself out of bed with a groan. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen as she packed the last few items into her carry-on bag. Another business trip, another early flight. She'd done this dance 100 times before. Outside her apartment window, Seattle was still dark, the city lights twinkling against the pre-dawn sky. A light rain tapped against the glass, typical weather that she wouldn't miss during her week in Washington, D.C. Jessica checked her watch and called for a rideshare. No time for breakfast at home. She'd grab something at the airport. Flying out for work again? Asked her driver, a friendly older man with gray hair and kind eyes. Yeah, heading to D.C. for a client meeting, Jessica replied, stifling a yawn. Nothing exciting, but that wasn't entirely true. Jessica never told strangers what she really did. Cybersecurity consultant was the simple answer, the job title on her business cards. It was easier than explaining her background in military communications or the classified projects she now handled for government contractors. The airport was already bustling despite the early hour. Jessica moved through security with practiced efficiency, her laptop and toiletries ready for inspection before the TSA agent even asked. She'd mastered the art of business travel, minimal jewelry, slip-on shoes, no belt. Small tricks that saved precious minutes. With time to spare before boarding, she found a quiet corner in a coffee shop and opened her laptop. Her inbox was flooded with emails marked urgent, but none that couldn't wait until she had proper caffeine in her system. She ordered a large black coffee and a breakfast sandwich, then pulled up the files she wanted to review during the flight. Final boarding call for Flight 1457 to Washington, D.C. The announcement echoed through the terminal, pulling Jessica from her thoughts. She gathered her belongings and made her way to the gate, joining the line of sleepy-eyed travelers. The plane was packed, as usual, for the cross-country route. Jessica found her seat, 12F, a window spot, and tucked her carry-on into the overhead bin. A middle-aged man in a rumpled suit took the middle seat beside her, immediately claiming both armrests. Jessica didn't mind. She preferred looking out the window anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 1457 to Washington Dulles International Airport. Our flight time today will be approximately 5 hours and 20 minutes, the flight attendant announced over the intercom. Jessica settled in, pulling out her noise-canceling headphones as the safety demonstration began. She'd heard it all before. Instead, she watched the ground crew outside, moving with purpose across the wet tarmac. There was something comforting about the routine, the systems and protocols that kept everything running smoothly. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Jessica felt the familiar tension in her shoulders ease. Something about being in transit, suspended between destinations, always brought her a strange sense of peace. No one could reach her here. No urgent calls, no last-minute meetings. Just her thoughts, and 5 hours of uninterrupted time. The plane taxied to the runway, engines humming with building power. Then came the surge of acceleration, pressing Jessica gently back into her seat as the aircraft lifted into the cloudy Seattle sky. They broke through the gray layer into brilliant sunshine, and she allowed herself a small smile. No matter how many times she flew, that moment never lost its magic. Once they reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign dinged off, Jessica pulled out her laptop again. She had reports to review before her meeting tomorrow, security assessments that required her full attention. But her mind kept drifting to 5 years ago, when her work involved much higher stakes. The Air Force seemed like a lifetime ago now. Technical Sergeant Jessica Chen, communications specialist with the 22nd Airborne Division. She'd been good at her job, more than good. Her natural talent for systems integration and quick thinking in crisis situations had earned her the nickname Nighthawk from her commanding officer. Silent, sharp, and always sees in the dark, he'd said when he gave her the handle. A flight attendant stopped by with the drink cart, interrupting her memories. "Coffee, please," Jessica said. "Black." "Heading to D.C. for business or pleasure?" the attendant asked as she poured. "Business," Jessica replied with a polite smile. Always business. The man beside her was already snoring softly, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. Across the aisle, a young woman bounced a fussy baby on her lap while her partner searched frantically through a diaper bag. Behind her, two colleagues discussed quarterly reports in hushed voices. Jessica turned back to her window. They were flying over mountains now, their peaks dusted with early snow. She remembered flying in much less comfortable aircraft during her service. Military transport planes with hard seats and earplugs to block the deafening engine noise. How strange that those uncomfortable flights held some of her fondest memories. She'd never planned to leave the Air Force. The work had been meaningful, the camaraderie unlike anything in civilian life. But then came the Tehran operation, a communications breakdown that nearly cost lives. Jessica had managed to restore contact just in time, working frantically to bypass damaged systems. The mission was ultimately successful, but the close call had shaken her. 3 months later, she submitted her papers and entered the private sector. The pay was better, the hours more regular, the stakes not quite so high. Most days she didn't regret her decision, but sometimes on quiet mornings or long flights like this one, she wondered what might have been. Jessica opened her secure files and forced herself to focus. The client was worried about potential vulnerabilities in their new payment system. It was her job to find the weaknesses before less friendly parties did. She lost herself in lines of code and security protocols, the familiar work absorbing her complete attention. 2 hours passed before she looked up again, her eyes dry from staring at the screen. The landscape below had changed to flat farmland, a patchwork of brown and green squares stretching to the horizon. Jessica stretched as much as the confined space would allow and decided to take a break. She'd earned a few minutes of mindless entertainment. As she was about to close her work files, a notification popped up on her screen, a standard system update reminder. Jessica clicked accept without much thought. The update began installing, a progress bar crawling slowly across her screen. Something about the update looked odd. The formatting wasn't quite right, and it asked for permissions that seemed unnecessary. Jessica's cybersecurity instincts kicked in, and she quickly opened a diagnostic tool to examine what was happening. What she found made her pulse quicken. This wasn't a standard update at all. Something or someone was attempting to access her system through the plane's Wi-Fi. She quickly disconnected from the network, but not before noticing something even stranger. For just a moment, she'd glimpsed a familiar protocol, one she hadn't seen since her military days. Jessica frowned, running a full system scan. It came back clean, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was happening. Maybe she was just being paranoid. Years of cybersecurity work had taught her to see threats everywhere. She closed her laptop and slipped it back into her bag. Maybe it was time for that nap after all. Jessica leaned her head against the cool window, watching thin clouds drift by below them. She'd mentioned the strange update to her IT department when she landed, just to be safe. As she drifted towards sleep, Jessica had no way of knowing that this routine flight was about to become anything but ordinary. She was just another passenger in seat 12F, one face among hundreds, her past life and special skills hidden beneath the surface. For now at least, she was simply a woman on a plane, flying east into the rising sun, unaware that somewhere ahead, circumstances were aligning that would soon call the Nighthawk back into action. I've written a detailed 1,200-word expansion of Part 1 as requested. The story introduces Jessica Chen, a former Air Force communications specialist who now works as a cybersecurity consultant, as she boards a routine flight from Seattle to Washington, D.C. The narrative uses simple, natural language, creates a human-centric story focusing on Jessica's thoughts and experiences, builds intrigue with hints about her military background and a mysterious notification, avoids any content that would violate YouTube policies, maintains an engaging flow to keep the audience interested. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this first part of the story? I'll create part 2 of the story in a separate document with approximately 1,200 words. I'll maintain simple English, keep it engaging, use a natural tone, ensure it's human-centric, and avoid any content that might violate YouTube policies. May the F-22 pilot stand at attention, Part 2. Jessica woke with a jolt as the plane shuddered violently. Her head bumped against the window and she winced, instantly alert. The man next to her gripped the armrests, his knuckles white. Overhead, a few oxygen masks had dropped from their compartments. "Ladies and gentlemen, The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, strained but professional. We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats immediately and fasten your seatbelts. Another violent shake rocked the aircraft. A child started crying somewhere behind her. Jessica tightened her seatbelt and took a deep breath, falling back on her military training. Stay calm. Assess the situation. Act deliberately. The flight attendants rushed down the aisles, checking seatbelts and securing loose items. Their practiced smiles couldn't hide the concern in their eyes. Jessica had seen that look before in Tehran, when communications had gone dark and they'd waited, breathless, for instructions that might never come. "This is more than turbulence," muttered the businessman beside her, his earlier sleepiness gone. "Something's wrong with the plane." Jessica nodded silently. Her instincts told her the same thing. The vibrations didn't feel like weather-related turbulence. There was a mechanical rhythm to them, like something was malfunctioning in the aircraft's systems. The cabin lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized at half their normal brightness. The entertainment screens on the seatbacks went dark. A nervous murmur spread through the cabin as passengers exchanged worried glances. "This is your captain speaking," the voice returned, noticeably more tense now. "We're dealing with some technical difficulties and will be making an unscheduled landing as a precautionary measure. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions." Technical difficulties. Jessica knew that phrase well. It was what officials said when they didn't want to cause panic. The plane lurched again, and this time the drop in altitude was unmistakable. They were descending rapidly. A flight attendant stumbled down the aisle, grabbing seatbacks for support. "Electronic devices need to be stowed now," she instructed, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. Jessica reached for her bag to put away her laptop, but hesitated. That strange notification from earlier nagged at her. On a hunch, she pulled out her computer and opened it. The Wi-Fi symbol in the corner of her screen was blinking erratically, connecting and disconnecting in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. Against protocol and better judgment, Jessica reconnected to the plane's network. Her cybersecurity software immediately flashed warnings: multiple unauthorized access attempts, system architecture compromised, data packets being redirected. "Ma'am, you need to put that away now," the flight attendant said, stopping by her row. "Just 1 minute," Jessica replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I think I might be able to help." The attendant started to protest, but another violent shake of the plane sent her grabbing for support. She moved on to the next passenger, leaving Jessica to her work. What Jessica saw on her screen made her blood run cold. Someone or something was attacking the plane's electronic systems, not just the passenger Wi-Fi, but potentially the aircraft's navigation and communication systems as well. Modern planes were essentially flying computers, and this one was being hacked mid-flight. A new window suddenly popped up on her screen, a command prompt she hadn't opened. Lines of code scrolled by too fast to read, but Jessica recognized the format instantly. It was a military-grade communication protocol, one she had used countless times during her service. But what was it doing on a commercial flight? The plane banked sharply to the left, causing overhead bins to pop open. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling all at once. Passengers gasped and reached for them with shaking hands. "Put on your oxygen mask," the businessman next to her urged, his voice muffled by his own mask. Jessica secured her mask with one hand while still typing with the other. She had found something, a back door into the communication system that shouldn't have been there. The code had a signature she recognized, an encryption pattern used by certain branches of the military. This wasn't a random hack or malfunction, it was deliberate, targeted, and using protocols only someone with specific training would know. The intercom crackled. "This is your captain. We've lost contact with air traffic control, and our navigation systems are compromised. We're working to resolve the situation. Please prepare for emergency landing procedures." Panic rippled through the cabin. A woman across the aisle began to pray audibly. The young couple with the baby held each other's hands, tears streaming down their faces. Jessica made a decision. She navigated to the back door in the system and entered a command string, one she hadn't used in 5 years but had memorized during her training. It was a military emergency override, a last resort measure to establish secure communications. For a long moment, nothing happened. The plane continued its shaky descent, the engines whining with effort. Then, miraculously, a new window appeared on her screen, a secure connection to an external system. Jessica hesitated for just a second. Accessing military channels without authorization was a federal offense. But 200 lives were at stake, including her own. She took a deep breath and typed in her old access codes, followed by her service number and the handle she hadn't used since leaving the Air Force Nighthawk. The screen went black. Jessica held her breath. Had she made a mistake? Had her clearance been revoked? Then new text appeared, simple green letters against the black background. Identity confirmed. Welcome, Nighthawk, secure channel established. Relief flooded through her. The system still recognized her. Now she needed to figure out what was happening and how to help. Jessica began typing rapidly, explaining the situation and requesting emergency assistance. A response came almost immediately. Location confirmed. F-22 squadron in vicinity. Stand by for contact. F-22s? The Air Force's most advanced fighter jets were nearby. That seemed like an extraordinary coincidence, or perhaps not a coincidence at all. Jessica's mind raced with possibilities as she continued to communicate through the secure channel. New text appeared. Pilots notified of Nighthawk contact. Priority response initiated. Jessica frowned. Her handle shouldn't warrant any special attention. She had been a competent communications specialist, but hardly important enough to trigger a priority response. A private message window opened on her screen. Nighthawk. This is Captain Richard Torres, U.S. Air Force. Confirm identity. Jessica typed back quickly. Technical Sergeant Jessica Chen, former 22nd Airborne Division Communications Specialist. Service number 87294TC. The response came back immediately. Holy hell. It really is you. Stand by. We're scrambling jets to your position now. Jessica stared at the screen in confusion. The captain's reaction seemed excessive for the situation. Yes, a commercial airliner in distress warranted military assistance, but this felt personal somehow. Before she could question it further, the plane's main lights failed completely, plunging the cabin into semi-darkness. Emergency floor lights activated, casting an eerie blue glow throughout the aircraft. The engines sputtered, and for a heart-stopping moment Jessica thought they might fail completely. Then they roared back to life, louder than before. We've lost our primary navigation systems, the captain announced, his voice now openly concerned. We're flying on backup systems with limited functionality. Through her window, Jessica could see they were no longer over farmland. They were approaching mountains, dangerous terrain for an emergency landing. She turned back to her laptop where the secure channel remained active. Captain Torres, she typed. The plane is in serious trouble. Navigation systems compromised. Possible hack in progress. We need immediate assistance and a safe landing site. Roger that, Nighthawk. We have your position. 2 F-22s are en route, ETA 4 minutes. Can you access the plane's communication system to establish direct contact with the pilots? Jessica glanced around the darkened cabin, at the frightened faces illuminated by the blue emergency lights. These people had no idea that their lives might depend on her ability to remember training from 5 years ago. I'll try, she typed, and began working to bridge the gap between her secure military channel and the plane's systems. As she worked, a new message appeared from Captain Torres. Nighthawk, there's something you should know. Your handle, it carries weight. The Tehran operation wasn't just successful because of you. It was, well, you'll be briefed properly when you're safe. For now, know that those pilots will do anything to get you home. Jessica stared at the message, her fingers frozen above the keyboard. What was he talking about? Tehran had been a communications failure that she'd barely managed to fix. It was the reason she'd left the service, haunted by how close they'd come to disaster. The plane shuddered again, bringing her back to the present. Questions would have to wait. Right now, she needed to save this flight. Jessica took a deep breath and continued working, unaware that her ordinary business trip was about to reconnect her with a past she thought she'd left behind, and reveal truths that had been kept from her for years. I've written part 2 of the story, continuing Jessica's journey as the flight encounters serious technical difficulties. This section builds tension as the plane experiences system failures, reveals Jessica's discovery of a potential cyber attack on the aircraft, shows her taking initiative by using her military background to establish contact with the Air Force, introduces a mystery about her past, and the significance of her Nighthawk handle. Sets up the arrival of the F-22 fighters in the next part. The narrative maintains simple, engaging language while creating dramatic tension. It focuses on human reactions and emotions during the crisis, with natural dialogue and descriptive elements that help readers visualize the scene. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this second part of the story? I'll create part 3 of the story in approximately 1,200 words, continuing where we left off. I'll keep it engaging with simple English, maintain a natural tone, ensure it's human-centric, and avoid any content that might violate YouTube policies. Made the F-22 pilot stand at attention, part 3. The businessman beside Jessica leaned over, eyeing her laptop screen with a mix of confusion and hope. "What are you doing? Is that military code?" Jessica angled the screen away slightly. "I used to be in the Air Force," she said quietly. "I'm trying to help." She didn't have time to explain more as her fingers continued their dance across the keyboard. The secure channel was working, but bridging it to the plane's communication system was proving difficult. Years had passed since she'd done this kind of work, and the commercial aircraft used different protocols than military planes. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's strained voice came over the intercom again. "We're attempting to divert to a regional airport in Colorado. Please stay in your seats with seatbelts fastened." Colorado? Jessica glanced out the window at the approaching mountains. They were losing altitude too quickly to make it safely over those peaks. A new message appeared on her screen. "Nighthawk, F-22s are 2 minutes out. We need voice communication established ASAP." Jessica bit her lip, thinking quickly. The plane's Wi-Fi system connected to its main communication array. If she could reroute through that— "Excuse me," she said to the businessman. "I need to get to the back of the plane. Can you let me out?" He looked at her like she was crazy. "We're in an emergency descent. You can't get up now." "I have to," Jessica insisted, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "It's important." Reluctantly, he moved his legs to let her pass. Jessica clutched her laptop to her chest and made her way down the aisle, bracing herself against each seat as the plane continued its unsteady descent. A flight attendant spotted her immediately. "Ma'am, you need to return to your seat right now," she called out, making her way toward Jessica. "I need to speak with the captain," Jessica said firmly. "I'm former Air Force Communications, and I might be able to help." The flight attendant hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the desperate situation. "Please," Jessica added. "We don't have much time." After a moment's consideration, the flight attendant nodded. "Follow me." She led Jessica to the front of the plane and knocked on the cockpit door, explaining the situation to the pilots through the intercom. Seconds later, the door opened. Inside the cockpit, warning lights flashed across control panels. The captain and co-pilot looked up briefly as Jessica entered, their faces tense with concentration. "Make it quick," the captain said, his hands steady on the controls despite the stress evident in his voice. "We're flying blind here. Navigation's gone? Communications are spotty at best." Jessica explained rapidly about the military channel she'd established and the F-22s en route to assist them. The co-pilot looked skeptical. "How did you manage to contact the military?" "I used to be Technical Sergeant Jessica Chen, communications specialist," she explained. "I recognized some unusual patterns in your system failure that matched military protocols I've seen before." The captain glanced at her. "You think we're being deliberately compromised?" Jessica nodded. "Almost certainly. But right now we need to focus on getting help. I need access to your communication array to patch in my secure channel." The pilots exchanged a quick look, silently weighing their limited options. "Do it," the captain decided, gesturing to an access panel. "Tom, help her." The co-pilot, Tom, pointed Jessica to a small terminal tucked beside the main control panel. "You can access the comm system from here." Jessica plugged her laptop into the terminal and began the complex process of integrating the systems. As she worked, she noticed the altimeter continuing to drop at an alarming rate. They were down to 15,000 feet with mountains looming ahead. "We need to change course," she said urgently. "Those mountains—" "We're trying," the captain replied grimly. "Manual controls are sluggish and the autopilot keeps trying to take us back on the original flight path." This confirmed Jessica's suspicions. Someone was remotely controlling the aircraft, or at least attempting to. But why? What could anyone possibly gain from bringing down a commercial airliner? Her laptop pinged. Connection established. "I've got it," she announced. Patching through the military channel now. She routed the communication to the cockpit speakers just as a crisp voice came through. "Commercial Flight 1457. This is Captain David Lee of the United States Air Force. Do you copy?" The relief in the cockpit was palpable. The captain grabbed his headset. "This is Captain Robert Wilson of Flight 1457. We copy. We've lost navigation control and are on a collision course with the Rockies. We need immediate assistance." "Understood, Captain Wilson. We have visual on your aircraft. 2 F-22 Raptors are approaching your position from the east. Stand by." Through the cockpit window, Jessica saw them. 2 sleek, deadly shadows slicing through the clouds toward them, moving with impossible speed and grace. The F-22 Raptor was the most advanced fighter jet in the world, and these 2 were now their lifeline. "Flight 1457, we're moving into escort position. We'll guide you to Grand Junction Regional Airport. It's the nearest field that can handle an aircraft of your size." The captain acknowledged, but then added, "Our controls are compromised. We may not be able to follow your lead." There was a brief pause before Captain Lee responded. "Understood. We're working on a solution. Is Nighthawk still aboard?" The captain looked at Jessica, eyebrows raised in question. She took the headset from him. "This is Nighthawk," she said, feeling strange using her old handle. "Technical Sergeant Jessica Chen." "Sergeant Chen." Captain Lee's voice changed, becoming almost reverent. "It's an honor. I need you to help us take back control of that aircraft." The co-pilot shot her a curious look, clearly wondering why a fighter pilot would speak to her with such respect. "I'll try," Jessica replied, "but I need to know what we're dealing with." "This isn't a random system failure." "Correct. We believe your aircraft is being targeted by a cyber attack, possibly the same group that was active during the Tehran operation." Jessica's breath caught. "Tehran again. What was the connection?" "Captain Lee, what exactly happened in Tehran?" "My understanding was that it was a communications failure that nearly compromised a mission." There was a long pause before he responded. "That's not accurate, Sergeant. Tehran was an attempted terrorist attack on multiple U.S. military communications networks. Your countermeasures didn't just save one mission, they protected our entire regional command structure. That's classified information, but under the circumstances..." Jessica stared blankly ahead, processing this revelation. She'd never been told the full scope of what happened that day. The plane shuddered violently, dropping several hundred feet in seconds. Oxygen masks deployed in the cabin again as warning alarms blared in the cockpit. "We're losing engine power," the captain said urgently. "Fighting with the controls." Outside, one of the F-22s pulled alongside them, close enough that Jessica could see the pilot inside, his helmet turning toward their cockpit. He raised his hand in a crisp salute when he spotted her. "Nighthawk, listen carefully," Captain Lee's voice returned. "We believe the attackers are using the same backdoor they attempted in Tehran. Your countermeasure code should still work." Jessica swallowed hard. "That code was experimental. I created it on the fly, and it became the basis for our current cyber defense systems," Lee replied. "You were never told because it was classified above your clearance level. The handle Nighthawk is now used as an emergency override in military communication systems worldwide." Jessica felt lightheaded, disconnected from reality. All these years she'd thought of Tehran as her failure, the reason she'd left the service. Instead, it had apparently been her greatest achievement, one they'd never even told her about. "Flight 1457, you're approaching critical terrain," the second F-22 pilot's voice cut in. "We need that countermeasure now." Jessica pushed aside her shock and focused on the task at hand. Lives depended on her remembering a code she'd written 5 years ago in the heat of another crisis. She began typing rapidly, reconstructing the countermeasure from memory. It was complex, a series of commands that would identify the intrusion pathway, isolate it, and then send back a destructive package to the source. As she worked, the plane continued its treacherous descent, the mountains growing larger in the windshield. The F-22 stayed with them, one on each wing, silent guardians against the approaching peaks. 1 minute to impact with terrain, the co-pilot announced, his voice tight but professional. Jessica typed faster, sweat beading on her forehead. The code was almost complete. Just a few more lines. 30 seconds, the co-pilot called out. The passengers would be terrified, Jessica knew. Strangers brought together by chance, now facing death together. She couldn't let that happen. With a final command, she executed the countermeasure. For 3 heart-stopping seconds, nothing happened. Then suddenly, the cockpit displays flickered and came back online. The engine noise steadied. "I have control," the captain exclaimed, pulling back on the yoke. The plane's nose lifted, clearing the nearest mountain peak by mere hundreds of feet. Through the secure channel, Jessica heard cheering from the Air Force personnel. The F-22 pilots wagged their wings in celebration. Captain Lee's voice returned, steady and professional once more. "Excellent work, Nighthawk. We'll escort you to Grand Junction. And when you land, there are some people very interested in speaking with you." Jessica nodded, though he couldn't see her. As the plane banked away from the mountains toward safety, she wondered what other secrets her past held, and what this unexpected reunion with her former life might mean for her future. I've created part 3 of the story, picking up at the critical moment when Jessica needs to establish direct communication with the military pilots. This section shows Jessica taking action by making her way to the cockpit, reveals more about the Tehran operation and the significance of her Nighthawk handle, introduces the F-22 pilots and their respect for her past work, creates tension with the approaching mountains and failing aircraft systems, culminates in Jessica using her expertise to regain control of the plane. The narrative maintains a human-centric approach, focusing on the emotions and interactions between characters while building suspense about Jessica's mysterious past. The language is accessible and engaging, with natural dialogue and descriptive elements that help readers visualize the action. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this third part of the story? I'll create part 4 of the story in approximately 1,200 words, continuing the narrative with Jessica and the plane heading toward Grand Junction. I'll keep it engaging with simple language. Maintain a natural tone, ensure it's human-centric, and avoid any content that might violate YouTube policies. Made the F-22 pilots stand at attention, Part 4. The plane leveled off at 10,000 feet, flanked by the 2 F-22 Raptors that glistened in the afternoon sun. In the cockpit, Jessica wiped sweat from her forehead as the immediate danger passed. Captain Wilson and his co-pilot Tom exchanged relieved glances before turning their attention to her. "I don't know what you did," Captain Wilson said, "but you just saved over 200 lives." "Thank you." Jessica nodded, suddenly feeling the adrenaline crash. Her hands trembled slightly as she disconnected her laptop from the communications array. The systems should be stable now, but I'd avoid engaging the autopilot. We can't be sure the entire threat is neutralized. "Understood," the captain replied. "We'll fly her in manually. Tom, radio Grand Junction and let them know we're coming in for an emergency landing." As the co-pilot made the call, Captain Wilson looked at Jessica with undisguised curiosity. "So, Nighthawk? Sounds like you've got quite a history." Jessica managed a tired smile. "Apparently more than I knew." The secure line crackled and Captain Lee's voice came through again. "Flight 1457 will be escorting you all the way to the ground. Current ETA to Grand Junction is 17 minutes.
Nighthawk, are you monitoring?
"I'm here," Jessica responded, leaning toward the microphone. "We've got news from command. The countermeasure you deployed has been traced. It appears the attack originated from a server farm in Eastern Europe, possibly tied to the same group from Tehran. They scattered once they detected your response, but we've got cyber units tracking them now." Jessica processed this information, still struggling to reconcile her understanding of past events with what she was now learning. "Captain Lee, was anyone going to tell me about what really happened in Tehran?" There was a pause before he answered. "Honestly, probably not. After you left the service, your file was heavily classified. Most people who use the Nighthawk protocols don't even know they were created by a real person. But the pilots recognize the name," she pointed out. "In certain elite squadrons, yes. The F-22 program has the highest security clearance. These pilots know the legend." "Legend?" Jessica couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. She heard Lee chuckle. "We'll save that conversation for when you're on the ground. For now, let's focus on getting everyone to safety." The captain gestured for Jessica to take a seat in the jump chair behind them. She sat down, buckling in as they began their approach to Grand Junction. "We should update the passengers," Jessica suggested. "They must be terrified." Captain Wilson nodded and picked up the intercom microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I'm pleased to inform you that we have regained control of all major systems and are being escorted to Grand Junction Regional Airport in Colorado. We expect to land safely in approximately 15 minutes. The sudden change in altitude and our emergency procedures were necessary due to a technical malfunction that has now been resolved. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. I want to assure you that you are in safe hands." He didn't mention the cyber attack or Jessica's role in saving them. That information would likely remain classified, at least for now. Jessica peered through the cockpit window at the F-22 flying alongside them. The pilot noticed her looking and gave another respectful nod. It felt surreal, these elite aviators treating her with such deference. For 5 years she'd been just another civilian, her military service a closed chapter of her life. Now in the span of an hour everything had changed. "There it is," Tom announced, pointing ahead to where the terrain flattened into a valley. Grand Junction. Jessica could see the airport now, its runway standing out against the surrounding landscape. Emergency vehicles were already positioned along the tarmac, lights flashing, standard procedure for an incoming aircraft in distress. "Flight 1457, this is Grand Junction Tower." A new voice came over the radio. "You're cleared for emergency landing on runway 11. Wind is 5 knots from the northwest. Emergency crews standing by." "Roger that, Tower," Captain Wilson responded. Beginning final approach. The F-22s peeled away slightly, giving the commercial airliner room to maneuver while maintaining their protective escort. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing," Wilson instructed through the intercom. As they descended toward the runway, Jessica noticed something unusual through the cockpit window. Beyond the standard emergency vehicles, a group of black SUVs and what looked like military personnel were gathered near a hangar. "This wasn't typical for an emergency landing. Looks like your friends came to meet you," Captain Wilson commented. Following her gaze, the plane touched down with a slight bump, the pilots expertly guiding the aircraft despite the compromised systems. They taxied toward the designated area where the emergency vehicles waited. As they rolled to a stop, the F-22s made one final pass overhead before banking away toward the military section of the airport. Jessica watched them go, feeling an unexpected pang of nostalgia for her service days. Captain Wilson shut down the engines and let out a long breath. "Not how I expected this flight to go." He turned to Jessica and extended his hand. "Thank you again, Sergeant." "I'm not a sergeant anymore," Jessica said, shaking his hand. "Just a civilian who happened to remember some useful skills." "I think we both know you're a bit more than that," Tom added with a smile. Outside, emergency crews approached the aircraft. Flight attendants began the process of preparing for passenger disembarkation. Jessica gathered her laptop and stood suddenly uncertain about what would happen next. "What should I do?" she asked. "Standard procedure would be for all passengers to exit and be checked by medical personnel," Captain Wilson explained. "But I have a feeling someone will be looking for you specifically." As if on cue, the cockpit phone rang. Tom answered it, listened briefly, then looked at Jessica. "There's a Colonel Parker who's requesting you exit through the forward door. He says it's a matter of national security."